The house everyone admired. From the outside, the Holt family looked like the kind of people neighbors quietly envied. Their weathered single-story home sat just beyond the dunes of a lesser-known Oregon shoreline, half hidden by wind-bent pines and the constant hush of the Pacific. It wasn't large, it wasn't new, and it certainly wasn't impressive by modern standards, yet there was something about it that felt warm, steady, and safe. At least, that was the story everyone told themselves. Caleb Holt had spent most of his life on the water. His skin was permanently darkened by sun and salt, his hands rough from nets and rope, his voice calm in the way of men who rarely raise it. Locals respected him not because he was loud or powerful, but because he showed up every morning before dawn and came home every evening with the same quiet reliability. His wife, Maribel, balanced the household with tireless energy, selling fish at the morning market, cooking, cleaning, and somehow still finding time to ask about homework and listen to small stories that others might dismiss as meaningless. Their children were often mentioned in the same breath as the word well-raised. Rowan, tall for his age and already carrying the posture of adulthood, rarely caused trouble. Teachers described him as reserved, helpful, and mature beyond 17. Eloan, 2 years younger, was brighter and quicker to laugh, known around town for helping her mother at the stalls before school and greeting customers with an easy smile. People said the Holt kids were lucky. People said the Holts had done something right. What no one ever questioned was the house itself. With only 2 bedrooms, the arrangement had been decided years earlier and never revisited. Caleb and Maribel took the smaller room. Rowan and Eloan shared the other, a narrow space with 2 dressers, a single window, and a bunk bed they'd long since abandoned for 2 separate mattresses pushed apart on the floor. It had started as a practical solution, then quietly hardened into routine. Family is family, Maribel would say. They're siblings. What could possibly go wrong? Evenings followed a rhythm that felt almost sacred. Dinner at the small wooden table. Stories from school. Caleb nodding while listening, Maribel reminding Rowan to watch over his sister like a proper older brother. Laughter filled the room, and exhaustion dissolved into something like peace. Afterward, lights dimmed, doors closed, and the house settled into the familiar sounds of wind, waves, and distant buoys. Yet time does not stand still simply because a family believes it should. Without ceremony or warning, childhood gave way to adolescence. Rowan grew quieter, more inward, often retreating into his phone after everyone else had gone to bed. Eloan began lingering in front of the mirror longer than before, asking questions that Maribel brushed off with distracted answers. None of it felt urgent. None of it felt dangerous. Life was busy. Bills needed paying. Boats needed fixing. Tomorrow always arrived too quickly. At night, when the room went dark and the ocean air slipped through the window, the siblings talked. About school. About friends. About things they didn't know who else to ask. In that closeness, comfort blurred into familiarity, and familiarity quietly eroded boundaries that had never been clearly drawn to begin with. Outside, the Holt house remained what it had always been, a symbol of simplicity and togetherness on a peaceful American coast. Inside, something fragile was already beginning to crack. And no one, not the parents, not the neighbors, not even the children themselves understood that the most devastating storms often arrive without sound. Lines that were never drawn. Change did not arrive with noise or drama. It crept in quietly, disguised as routine, curiosity, and the false safety of familiarity. Rowan's phone became his refuge. Late at night, after the house had gone still and the wind pressed softly against the walls, he lay awake scrolling through things he barely understood but felt drawn to all the same. At school, conversations were changing. Jokes were sharper, questions more loaded, silences more uncomfortable. No one explained what any of it meant. Everyone just assumed you were supposed to know. Eloan noticed the shift in him before anyone else did. He spoke less at dinner. His laughter came later than before, as if he needed time to decide whether it was appropriate. Sometimes she caught him staring at nothing, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. She asked if he was tired. He nodded. That was enough. Their shared room became a private world cut off from adults, a place where rules were implied rather than spoken. They talked in the dark, voices low, the way children do when they feel something is important but don't yet know why. Rowan mentioned things he'd heard. Eloan asked questions she would never dare raise with her mother. Each answer, uncertain and incomplete, only opened the door to another question. No one told them where the boundaries were. No one explained why certain doors should remain closed. At first, the conversations felt harmless. Awkward laughter. Nervous pauses. A sense of discovering forbidden knowledge without fully grasping its weight. Rowan convinced himself that confusion was normal, that everyone felt this way at their age. Eloan trusted him because he was her brother, because he was older, because adults had taught her that trust inside family was absolute. Days passed. Then weeks. Caleb and Maribel noticed nothing beyond the ordinary. Rowan still helped with nets and repairs. Eloan still woke early for the market. Their grades held steady. Their smiles appeared on cue. To busy parents, this was proof enough that all was well. Worry requires contrast, and there was none to see. What changed lived beneath the surface. The room felt smaller than before. Silence stretched longer. Thoughts that once faded in daylight returned sharper at night. Curiosity stopped feeling theoretical and began demanding answers that neither of them possessed the maturity to handle. They didn't see danger. They saw secrecy. And secrecy, to young minds, often feels like control. Rowan sensed unease but mistook it for nerves. Eloan sensed fear but mistook it for excitement. Neither recognized responsibility. Neither understood consequence. They were still children, navigating adult concepts without guidance, believing that ignorance could protect them from harm. Outside, the ocean remained calm. The house remained admired. The Holt family remained a quiet symbol of stability in a small coastal town. Inside one small bedroom, however, lines that should have been clear were dissolving slowly, silently setting the stage for a truth that would soon be impossible to hide. When the body speaks first. The first warning came quietly, disguised as fatigue. Eloan told herself she was just tired from waking early, from balancing school with helping her mother at the market. When nausea crept in during the mornings, she blamed the smell of fish, the cold air, the long hours on her feet. Teenagers get sick sometimes. Everyone knows that. She said nothing, pushed through it, smiled when customers greeted her. But the days did not improve. They stacked. Her appetite faded. Her head spun without warning. At school, she found it harder to focus, harder to sit still. Once, during class, her vision blurred so suddenly she had to grip the desk to keep from falling. The teacher asked if she was okay. Eloan nodded too quickly. Drawing attention felt dangerous now, though she couldn't yet explain why. Rowan noticed before their parents did. He noticed the way she moved more slowly, the way she avoided eye contact, the way she flinched when their mother reached out to touch her shoulder. At night, in the shared room, the familiar silence felt heavier than ever. The ocean outside sounded louder, closer, as if it were pressing in on them. "Are you sick?" he finally asked one night. Eloan hesitated. Her hands trembled beneath the blanket. "I don't know," she whispered. That answer lodged itself in Rowan's chest like a stone. He wanted to believe this was nothing, that worry itself was the real enemy. But fear has a way of sharpening instinct. And instinct told him something was wrong in a way they could no longer ignore. The truth arrived not with certainty, but with absence. When the calendar shifted and the days passed without what Eloan quietly expected, panic replaced denial. She counted. Then counted again. Each number felt louder than the last. At school, lessons about health and responsibility replayed in her mind, words she had once half listened to now echoing with unbearable clarity. One afternoon, she waited for Rowan by the door, her face pale, eyes swollen as if she had been crying for hours. When he stepped inside, she didn't greet him. She simply stood there, fingers clenched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "I think something's wrong," she said. Rowan tried to smile. Tried to steady his voice. "Like what?" Her words came out broken, uneven. I think I might be pregnant." The house did not react. No sound cracked the walls. No thunder followed her confession. And yet Rowan felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath him. His thoughts scattered, colliding into panic, guilt, disbelief. He searched her face for doubt, for exaggeration, for any sign that this could still be undone by logic. But there was none. He told himself to be calm. Told himself they would handle it. That no one else needed to know. That problems stayed smaller if you kept them contained. He was still thinking like a child, believing secrecy could erase consequence. Eloan, meanwhile, was unraveling. Every glance from her parents felt like exposure. Every question felt dangerous. She stopped eating dinner. She avoided mirrors. Sleep abandoned her entirely, leaving her alone with spiraling thoughts and a growing sense of dread she could not name. Maribel noticed the change at last. Mothers often do, even when they don't want to. The weight loss. The dark circles under Eloan's eyes. The way her daughter recoiled slightly when touched. One morning, Maribel placed a hand on Eloan's forehead and felt how cold she was despite the mild weather. "We're going to the clinic," she said, not unkindly, but firmly. Eloan tried to protest. Her voice broke before the argument could even begin. That alone confirmed Maribel's fear. The drive into town passed in silence so thick it felt suffocating. Eloan stared out the window, watching familiar streets slide past, each one feeling farther away than the last. The examination room smelled like disinfectant and quiet dread. When the doctor returned with the results, time seemed to slow, as if the air itself resisted the truth being spoken aloud. Positive. Maribel heard the word but didn't understand it at first. Her mind rejected it outright, searching for alternatives that did not exist. 15, she thought. She's 15. This can be happening. Eloan broke down completely. The sobs came from somewhere deep and uncontrollable, a grief mixed with terror, shame, and confusion. Maribel stood frozen, her hands shaking, her thoughts collapsing inward. By the time they returned home, she felt as though she were walking into someone else's life. Caleb's reaction was quieter, but no less devastating. He didn't yell at first. He sat down, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as if the answers might be hidden in the grain of the wood. When he finally looked up at Rowan, the question in his eyes needed no words. Rowan said nothing. And in that silence, everything fell apart. The image of the Holt family, the admired, stable, unbreakable unit, collapsed in a single afternoon. Shock gave way to grief. Grief hardened into anger. Anger dissolved into a crushing sense of failure that filled every corner of the house. No one slept that night. They had crossed into a reality where there were no easy fixes, no harmless secrets, no pretending that love alone could undo what had been set in motion. And as the ocean wind rattled the windows, The family understood too late that some mistakes announce themselves not with drama, but with consequences that cannot be denied. A decision that could not be taken back. Morning came without relief. Light filtered through the thin curtains, exposing a house that felt unfamiliar, as if the walls themselves had shifted overnight. No one spoke during breakfast. Plates remained half full. The ordinary sounds of forks and cups felt too loud, too intrusive, as though normal life had no right to continue. Caleb finally broke the silence. His voice was low, controlled, but strained in a way Rowan had never heard before. He spoke about reality, about consequences, about how the town would react if the truth escaped the walls of their home. He spoke like a man trying to contain a flood with words alone. Maribel listened without interrupting, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes red and unfocused. Eloan sat curled inward, shrinking beneath the weight of adult decisions being made around her. When she tried to speak, when she whispered that she was scared, that she didn't want to lose what was growing inside her, Maribel flinched as if struck. The word inside felt unbearable. "You're still a child," Maribel said, her voice breaking despite her effort to stay firm. "You don't understand what this would do to your life." Eloan understood more than they realized. She understood fear. She understood loss. She understood that whatever choice was coming would follow her forever. But understanding did not give her power. It only made the helplessness sharper. Rowan watched from the edge of the room, trapped in a paralysis of guilt and terror. Every instinct told him to speak, to stop this, to take responsibility in a way that mattered. Yet no words came. He had already failed at the one thing his parents had always asked of him: to protect his sister. Now even silence felt like another betrayal. The decision formed gradually, not as a single declaration but as a narrowing of options until only one remained. It was framed as protection, as mercy, as the only way forward. No one used words like choice or future anymore. Those ideas had collapsed under the weight of urgency and shame. The drive to the city hospital was long and quiet. Maribel held Eloan's hand, gripping it as if afraid her daughter might disappear if she let go. Eloan stared out the window, watching the coastline fade into unfamiliar streets. Each mile felt like a step farther from herself. Inside the hospital, everything was clean and impersonal. Forms were signed. Instructions were given. Eloan nodded when told to, though her mind felt detached from her body, floating somewhere above the room. When she was led away, Maribel remained seated, hands clasped tightly, unable to stand, unable to pray. The waiting was worse than the act itself. Minutes stretched into something shapeless and cruel. Maribel replayed every moment of the past year, searching for the instant where she should have noticed, should have intervened, should have asked one more question instead of assuming everything was fine. By the time Eloan returned, pale and hollow-eyed, Maribel felt as though a part of her had been removed as well. They did not speak on the way home. Caleb was waiting when they arrived, sitting in the same position as before, unmoving, as if he had been holding himself still for hours. He looked at Eloan once, then away, unable to bear what he saw in her expression. He cleared his throat and said that this chapter was over, that it would never be mentioned again, that life had to continue. But chapters do not close simply because someone declares them finished. That night, the house felt colder than ever. Rowan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Eloan's quiet, uneven breathing across the room. The familiar comfort of shared space was gone, replaced by an awareness that could not be undone. He realized then that some decisions don't end pain, they only change its shape. Outside, the ocean kept moving, indifferent and endless. Inside the Holt home, something essential had been lost. And though no one said it aloud, each of them sensed the same truth: what had happened was not over. It had only begun to echo.
When silence turns against you.
Life resumed its shape, but not its meaning. From the outside, the Holt household appeared to recover with unsettling speed. Caleb returned to the water. Maribel reopened her stall at the market. Rowan went back to school. Eloan followed, quieter, thinner, her smile practiced and brief. Neighbors accepted the normalcy gratefully. People prefer stability. People rarely ask questions when answers might disturb their own peace. Inside the house, however, something had shifted permanently.
Eloan stopped sleeping through the night.
At first it was restlessness, tossing, turning, staring at the dark until dawn crept through the window. Then the dreams began. Not vivid at first, just impressions, a presence, a sound, the sense that she was being watched. She would wake with her heart racing, breath shallow, the room feeling unfamiliar despite being unchanged. Rowan noticed before anyone else. He always did. He heard her crying softly when she thought he was asleep. He saw her flinch at sudden noises, her eyes darting toward corners of the room as if expecting something to move. When he asked what was wrong, she shook her head and said she was fine, the same word everyone used when they were anything but. Guilt settled into Rowan like a second skin. It followed him everywhere, into classrooms, onto the shoreline, into his thoughts when he tried to distract himself. He replayed conversations endlessly, wondering which sentence, which moment, which silence had pushed everything past the point of return. He told himself he would make it right somehow, though he had no idea what that meant anymore. Then the accidents started. Caleb slipped while repairing the roof and fractured his leg badly enough to keep him off the boat for weeks. Maribel lost nearly a month's earnings when a customer vanished with her cash during a crowded morning rush. Rowan was struck by a car while biking home one evening, leaving his shoulder badly injured and his confidence shattered. Each event could be explained on its own. Bad luck. Carelessness. Coincidence. Together, they felt like something else. Maribel was the first to say it out loud, though her voice trembled when she did. It feels like we're being punished. Caleb wanted to argue. He had never been a superstitious man. He believed in effort, responsibility, cause and effect. But at night, when the house creaked and the wind howled just right, even he found himself listening more closely than before, as if expecting to hear something beneath the ordinary sounds of settling wood.
Eloan's condition worsened.
She began hearing things while awake, soft cries, whispers just beyond comprehension. Once, while washing dishes, she dropped a plate when she heard a voice behind her say, "Why didn't you want me?" The kitchen had been empty. Her hands shook for an hour afterward. She tried to tell Maribel, but the words tangled in her throat. How do you explain something that makes you sound broken? Instead, she withdrew further, spending hours alone, staring at nothing, replaying memories she wished she could erase. Rowan confronted her one night, his voice urgent but gentle. "You're not okay," he said. She finally nodded. Fear passed between them in silence. For the first time, Rowan felt what it meant to be truly powerless. He couldn't undo the past. He couldn't protect her now. All he could do was watch as the consequences they tried to bury refused to stay hidden. Caleb suggested counseling. Maribel suggested prayer. Neither felt sufficient. The house itself seemed heavier, as though it were absorbing their guilt and returning it to them in new forms. Even when Eloan's dreams eased for a night or two, the dread never fully left. It became clear that pretending had failed. Whatever the family had tried to silence was no longer willing to remain quiet. And as the nights grew longer and the air inside the Holt home thickened with unspoken fear, each of them understood the same terrifying truth: some wounds do not fade when ignored. They deepen. They wait. And eventually, they demand to be faced.
Learning how to carry what can be erased.
The breaking point did not arrive in a single dramatic moment. It unfolded slowly, the way exhaustion does, until one day there was simply nothing left to hold things together. Eloan collapsed during a school assembly. Not fainting in the way people imagine, but sinking inward, folding into herself as if her body had finally decided it could not keep pretending. The counselor called Maribel. The nurse spoke gently, using words like stress and trauma. No one said the things that hovered in the room, heavy and obvious. Everyone knew this was more than fatigue. That evening, the Holt family sat together for the first time in weeks without avoiding one another's eyes. Caleb spoke first. His voice no longer carried anger, only weariness. He admitted that silence had been his mistake, that in trying to protect the family's name, he had abandoned the family itself. Maribel cried openly, not in guilt alone, but in grief for the mother she had failed to be when guidance mattered most. Rowan finally found words he had been choking on for months. He did not excuse himself. He did not explain. He took responsibility in the only way he could, by naming the harm and acknowledging that love without boundaries had been dangerous. It was the first time he spoke like an adult, and it frightened him how late that growth had come. Eloan listened quietly. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. She said she did not want forgiveness yet. She said she needed time. She said she wanted help, not from secrecy, not from rituals meant to erase pain, but from people who would teach her how to live with what had happened without letting it define her entire life. They listened. Counseling began soon after. The sessions were slow, uncomfortable, and often painful. There were days when Eloan refused to talk.
Days when Rowan left feeling hollow.
Days when Maribel went home and cried in the car before stepping inside. Healing did not look like progress. It looked like honesty without relief. Caleb made changes too. He stopped working extra shifts. He stayed home more. He learned how to listen without trying to fix. It did not come naturally. Nothing about this did. Eloan began volunteering at a community center for younger kids, helping with homework, organizing donated clothes, doing small things that made her feel useful again. She never spoke about why she was there so often. She didn't need to. Each act was a quiet way of choosing life over disappearance. The nightmares faded, not completely, but enough. The voices receded into memory. What remained was weight, not terror. A burden she could carry, even on the days it felt unfair that she had to.
The house changed.
Doors stayed open. Sleeping arrangements changed without debate. Conversations about boundaries, consent, and responsibility happened openly, awkwardly, imperfectly, but they happened. The Holt family learned, too late but not entirely too late, that love requires structure as much as warmth. Time passed.
The ocean still rolled in every morning. The town still saw a quiet family by the shore.
What no one else could see was the cost beneath that Colmore, the work it took to keep going. Eloan understood now that some losses never become lessons. They become companions. They walk beside you, reminding you of who you were and who you must choose to be. She would carry that knowledge for the rest of her life. And every day, by waking up, by telling the truth, by refusing to look away again, the Holt family learned how to live not as they once were, but as people who finally understood that responsibility begins where denial ends.